feared and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and so jiggle my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Chasing the Pennant. I am here today with two of my co-hosts in Biscuit and Bork. First off, we'll start with Biscuit. How are you doing today?
Andrew, the sun is out, the birds are chirping. We have baseball later on this month. I can't complain today. I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great, nice sunny day here as well. It's actually going up to about 110 degrees.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, so it's definitely staying warm. I've stayed inside for most of today outside of walking back and forth from work. But like you said, we got baseball coming up. We're 2 days into summer spring training and about 22 days till opening day. But first off, Bork, how you doing?
I'm doing well, but you got to live in the heat of the moment sometimes, Andrew. I'm doing really well. Baseball's back. You saw some guys in the park. You saw the video of Harper slugging the ball after being out of hitting in an actual stadium's cage MVP for a long period of time. He was in whatever that de facto born cool looking thing on Instagram was that he was hitting in for a while. And he also kind of changed his stance a little bit, which I thought was kind of cool, but we'll get to that later, unless if that was just him warming up. But it's great. Baseball's back. Also, you guys know I'm a huge hockey guy, and Oscar Lindblom finally beat his cancer, so everything's positive and holly jolly and happy today, so I have no complaint.
Yeah, very good story there for Oscar. I'm glad to hear he's doing well and he beat cancer. So very good news for him. And hopefully it continues to go in the right direction for him as he continues to probably rehab to get ready for game shape again. But, yeah, no, we got baseball. Matt Klentak and company finally spoke in front of the media as it's opening back up. The player freeze is over. And, yeah, so Matt Klentak was back at it this week. And that's what?
No, I'm sorry. It's just how bad his quote was. So I'm already laughing at the fact that you said Matt Klentak was back at it this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, so he was back, and his quote, we'll start with what he had to say about the JT Realmuto situation, and that's where we're going to jump in. So let me read you his quote on JT real quick. And when he was asked about, obviously, the contract extension, which is the big news for JT, hopefully we see it get done. His answer was, here's the quote, "The landscape we left in March is different from the landscape now. We have to see how that manifests itself. We still love the player and want to have him for the long haul. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, and we need to factor that in," end quote. So, Bork, since you were laughing, let's get your opinions on this one first. What do you make of Matt Klentak and those comments?
Well, I watched the Return to Play special. I'm not sure if you guys saw that on the NBC Sports. Andrew, I know you have to watch that through whatever that weird cable thing is you use to get your cable channels from back up here. But I know it's obvious, like they said, he was just stating the obvious, but you could have stated it in a more laid out positive way where it didn't seem doom and gloom. Like, obviously the landscape has changed. There's no fans. You're only playing 60 games, So like Jim Salisbury said in that, like, no crap, the landscape has changed. Like, that's the most obvious thing you could have said. But like, if you flip that statement, I think it actually would have been better. Because if you started off talking about how much you love JT and want to see him here for the long haul, and then kind of went to, we have to kind of see how it plays out because the landscape has changed. Like we talk about in English classes, it's all about how you start sometimes. So like flipping your talk there even would have made it a little bit better. Still wouldn't have been the best statement, but it would have made it a little bit better. For me, it was just, he should have went with something like, look, we talked in March and we felt like we were coming to some type of like closeness, and then obviously everything halted. So now we have to see where everything's at, but we love JT. We love the type of player he is. and then just talked about how much you love JT as a player and not went on and on about the landscape. And then we just have to see how that manifests itself in our discussions. Like, he should have said one short thing, like I just said about how it's different, and then went into talking about the player. Then I don't think anybody would have had an issue with it. I think it was the issue of you just said too much on how the landscape has changed. You should have literally just been like, we had a deal we thought that was going to be good in March. It changed. Now we came back. We have to see how it is, but we love JT and talk all about that and not dwell on the obvious for another sentence. That's just it.
You know, I completely agree with you. I think the way he said it, he states the obvious, and the big thing that jumps out to me, and I know where we get the ability to read into this, and the big line, the big sentence that it is for me is there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And I get it, there probably is, because like you said, Bork, there's no one going to be in the stands and stuff. But that's obvious. Nobody wants to hear uncertainty. That's the big thing here. And people like myself are going to read into that and say, okay, he's not certain. And here's the thing. We knew they've been uncertain. And I know they've, quote unquote, we've heard they've been going back and forth at times. But in reality, if they were in a rush to get this deal done, he would have had this deal done before spring training and before everything kind of took place. And I know we've been on here before and we kind of talked about it, and some of us have been concerned from before spring training. Some of us have felt confident. I'm one that's been kind of concerned from the beginning, just because we see how stingy our front office has been with not going overboard, and now you get this whole thing. So I think as much as people want to read, it's obvious. The big word that sticks out to me is uncertainty, and I feel like that's been a word they could have used before this whole thing, and now they get to blame the situation on why it might take longer for the deal to get done. But Biscuit, what was your takeaway when you heard this quote?
Honestly, I think people really got up in arms about this, about his comment. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I do agree with you, Bork, when you said like there were different ways he could phrase it, and he could start with, talking about his love for JT and his desire to keep him in Philadelphia. But everything else, like, Matt Klentak has never really been good at statements. I feel like every time the guy opens his mouth, very similar to Andy McPhail, we always have some gripe with what he's saying. But like, this is what I kind of expected. Nothing he said was a surprise. I just kind of thought it was kind of like it is what it is at this time, and that the situation does just need to play itself out. I don't think this means fans should worry. I still think a deal will get done just because there's so much talent in the player. And like I said, like, yes, the fact that they, traded away Sixto Sanchez and Jorge Alfaro in that deal to get JT, those were two big assets, and that will be a reason I think the Phillies ultimately do get the deal done. But we're talking about not just, the best catcher in baseball. This guy could be a Hall of Famer one day. I don't have to go over his numbers from last year. Like I said, I think Matt Klentak is not the best at statements, but, I don't think the Phillies are really an organization to really ever come out and say, like, you know what, like, we're getting this done. I think that's really what Middleton's for. And I think back to Harper when he would kind of just go out on a whim and say, like, I don't care if I have to spend stupid money, we're getting it done. I think they're being a little more cautious now in that regard. But overall, the statement does not worry me.
Okay, and then that's the way I've seen a little bit on Twitter go back and forth with it. So a lot of people are worried. Some people are taking your stance, and I think again we have the ability to get to read into his comments here and kind of dissect them into the way everyone kind of wants to. And I know if the people that don't like Klentak are going to find ways to make it not look good for him, and I know I'm probably one of them, and I know you guys know I'm not a big Klentak fan myself, so
I definitely know.
I will see this because it's, to me, again, it concerns me the way he said it, and I understand. But like, if he would have just came out and said, "We would love to have JT back. We already restarted negotiating with him," and you could have just said like it's in the works. But he kind of
start with the positive. You have to start positive.
You don't even have to say the negatives, in my opinion. Really, like everyone knows the landscape's different. Everybody knows these are weird times and everything's up in air. Like just come out and say, we love JT. We know how good he is. We understand what we had to do to get him here. We understand how much it's going to cost, and we're going to do everything we can to get the deal done. That's all you got to say. Like, you don't have to go into the whole thing about it's a different landscape than March. Like that's obvious. You don't have to go into there's uncertainty right now in the world and where the contracts are going to go, because there is, and we've talked about before. Who knows what JT even wants? Like now that the off season is only 4 months away, he might want to test the market now, because he might, like, who knows what he's going to want in general now. So I think it's a big up in air kind of thing, and it's going to be interesting to follow now. But I know, for me personally, this was a concerning statement just because of the lack of confidence I already had in him. It'd be different if, and Biscuit, you mentioned how bad he is with his comments. Like if this was like the first time he kind of said something in a wrong way, it'd be easier to kind of say, okay, there's not much to take away from this. There's probably just a slip up or something like that. But the fact that he comes out time after time and comes out with these, that's what continues to make it concerning for me.
Yeah, well, I know they also talked about in the return to play, one of the things you brought up, which was Murph talked about how JT and his camp have to also be willing to accept the deal you give, and then they went into number, and then Jim Salisbury came back with saying, if you're willing to pay Zach Wheeler, who's a 30-year-old pitcher, 23.6, I believe it was, AAV for 5 years, you have to be willing to give a catcher that has had no injuries in his career, really, the money, at least that money probably, because that would be around, I think 23 is Joe Mauer's record for catchers. So he would want to get above 23, and 23.6 would potentially be enough above it. So at least that much you have to be willing to give JT, I would think, in order for him to not want to test the free agent market.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And it's funny, as we're talking about this and how bad his comments are, I don't know who would be worse. Who would you rather, like, making statements for your team, Klentak or Rob Manfred? Like, I feel like they're both. I feel like they're just both really bad.
Fuck it, Klentak.
Ruben Amaro.
That was not a choice, I believe. But
no, that wasn't a choice. But that's how much I would rather have someone else.
Well, yeah, because even Rob Manfred stuff the other day when he said there was no chance of even playing 60 games this year, that from the jump, no matter what the negotiations were. It's like you basically just admitted how unfaithful you guys were the whole time because you weren't willing to negotiate the amount of games. Like I feel like he just dug himself.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, that's like someone trying to merge businesses, and then at the last second they pull out, and they had a very good reason, and then 2 days later they're like, well, me and this guy, we just don't get along, and he's a freaking asshead, and like blah 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 blah, and then you just go, well, you clearly pulled out because you just don't like the guy.
I do have. I'm sorry to cut you off, Bork.
No, you're good. I'm done. No, you're done.
So I do have one point I need to make. I'm saying it right here on July 2nd at 5:35 this afternoon. The Phillies need to sign JT Realmuto for a bunch of reasons. Great player, future Hall of Famer, star catcher. But the most important reason of all is that I will be just distraught, angered, and furious because there's one team that has been pretty vocal about wanting JT Realmuto, and there has been articles written about this one team that may try to sign him if he walks from the Phillies, and you all know what I'm getting at. If the motherfucking New York Mets, the Mets, get JT Realmuto, I would be distraught, furious, and angry, and there will be no one to contain my wrath because I will hate. It would suck for him to walk, but for him to walk to another National League team, not just any National League team, National League East team, the Mets, I would be beside myself. So please, Klentak, Middleton, whoever it takes, get it done.
Yeah. If JT signs with the Mets, we honestly might need to like schedule like a time thing where like each podcast member needs to have a rotation and call Biscuit at some point to make sure he's doing okay.
Oh God, dude, I'd be. It's just, and you know what? Like, because I remember before they signed Wilson Ramos, it was like a thing. Like the Mets are in on him. They're trying to cough up a trade piece to get to send to Miami to get a deal done. And I guess it kind of just fell through with them. I don't remember much of the structure of the proposed deal, but like I remember that fell through, and they got Wilson Ramos from us, and the Phillies got it done to get JT. They gave up Cito, and the rest is history so far. But man, like, if they, oh God, I would just hate it. I would just hate it. One, because they should keep him. I know some people on this pod have this crazy idea that the Phillies should not extend JT Realmuto. Well, I think that is ludicrous. Sorry, but it needs to get done. He's one of the best players at his position in all of baseball. You don't just let someone like that walk.
No, I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree. I mean, you can't, especially to the Mets. That's a
Fuck the
ground.
Mets.
That's a ground for if I was the owner of the Phillies, one of the partners in the Phillies, and you couldn't get a deal done, and he went to our arch rival, that would be immediate grounds for firing the GM. I'd be like, no, this ain't happening. This ain't working. I'm sorry. We have to go other places now. This is just not working for me. I'm not having the best catcher in baseball leave our team and go to our arch rival who has a pretty good developing young roster, and then be like, yeah, you know what, guys, I'm now going to kill you for the next 5 to 7 years. And it's like, oh, this is great. This is exactly not what I want in my life. And the Mets also signed Bryce Harper's arch enemy, Hunter Strickland, too. So, just in case. So the Mets are just really trying to piss off Phillies fans.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And here's the thing. I saw this thrown out on Twitter a couple times, so I'm going to ask you guys this, and this is open to whoever wants to start it. But I saw, I forget what it was, but they had this poll, but would you rather let JT walk, or would you rather completely overpay him, like knowing you're overpaying him? So I don't know what you guys would think the deal is, but I mean, I don't know. Let's just say, I don't know, 5-6 years for like something crazy, like 130 to 140 million. Obviously, that'd probably be upward to almost overpaying him. So would you guys rather that, or would you rather let him walk in those two scenarios?
I'll start. Absolutely overpay the guy. He's a good baseball player, for fuck's sakes. Like, not for nothing. Like, look at it this way. Last year in 2019, he was in the National League with rankings amongst catchers, first in hits, first in batting average, first in RBIs. I think he was like second or third in home runs as well. He's still like, if you gave him he's only 29 years old too. So if you gave him a 5-year deal, that would take him to age 34. With the DH coming to the National League as well, you will be able to continue to give him at bats where he's also not behind the mound. He could also, if the wear and tear is starting to catch up with him, switch to first base or switch to being a DH full time. But like, let's be real, the guy's in great shape. He's one of the more, physically like built catchers in baseball. I don't know. I just, it's a commodity. Like, there was only so many catchers in baseball. I think it was like maybe like 10 to 12 catchers. I think it might have been 13 catchers actually who caught more than 100 games last season in all of baseball. Like, it's, this position isn't like kind of how it was in the 2000s where like there were star catchers. I feel like there's no like really more star catchers in baseball except for a handful of guys, and JT is one of them. Absolutely, I think they should overpay.
They should definitely overpay him. That was by John Marks and Ike Reese on 94, Andrew. I remember seeing that earlier because when I saw it earlier, they had to overpay him at like 93%. So I'm pretty sure if that's the other reason why I think it's grounds for firing immediately. If he goes to the damn Mets and Matt Klentak doesn't sign JT, because you basically have not half, like the whole city being like, no, you need to overpay this guy over letting him walk. When it's 93%, that's just a ridiculous differential. So, I mean, that's you definitely have to overpay JT for all the reasons Biscuit listed. And the other reason is with him, he's caught a lot amount of games in the MLB, but he didn't start as a catcher. He was the rarity that normally guys move from behind the plate to out somewhere else. JT moved from out somewhere else, drafted as a shortstop, to behind the plate. So that should help him in terms of not having to worry about the durability sense down the line.
Go ahead.
Just to reiterate what Boric is saying, I think he'd be a fine first baseman in his, mid 30s, late 30 years if, he can't swing it behind the plate anymore. I think the bat will be there. Like, and the bat's not, he's got a good, solid bat. It's not an elite bat. It's not, someone who, altogether he's an MVP caliber player, but I think the bat alone doesn't really make him the MVP. It's the whole package, but the bat is solid enough. I think he'd do fine switching to different positions. I think it would be first base in the future, just because, let's be real, Hoskins is great, and I do think, he has more to show, but at the same time, I think Hoskins still also has stuff to prove as well, so I don't think he's set in that position long-term for the future. Just every reason that comes to mind, it just screams to me, resign the guy. You have a stud. You have, has a bond and a friendship with the face of the franchise. You're going to piss him off if he walks. Like, that's not something you want to do to Bryce Harper, and in only his second year with the organization either. And the two clearly hit it off. They're very good friends just because of how you could tell just because of how they talk about one another. So I don't know why you wouldn't get it done at this point.
I agree. I know at the point of the season in MLB The Show where I could extend him, I paid him over $26 million because he wanted over $28 million, and I got him down $2 million. So I'm all for giving him that contract for 5 years.
Joe Boric, Phillies MLB The Show 20 GM.
Yeah, hire Boric to the Phillies front office staff to get the deal done. But no, you bring up a great point, Biscuit, and you don't want to anger your franchise player. And I mean, you saw it yesterday when the first day of summer camp or whatever you want to call it, your franchise player goes out there and wears their JT Real Muto t-shirt. Like, you're not going to tell me that was by accident. Like, obviously that was thought through. He intentionally did that, and he's trying to tell him to go out and sign him. Like, it was absolutely a statement move there by your franchise player. He's been on record mentioning wanting to re-sign him. And I know this offseason he was more hesitant on trading prospects, but we all know, he's probably a little frustrated last season when it was right around the deadline and you had him and JT and Hoskins kind of saying, yeah, we need another couple pieces in here to kind of make that next step and get maybe to a World Series run last year. And then obviously they didn't do anything at the deadline. So that was kind of, that kind of got in his head a little bit there. And I think he's trying to not let the same mistake happen in this way. And he's trying to go out there and make a statement. And to me, that's what it was. And I know some people might say, oh, it was just him wearing a shirt and you might overlook it. But to me, it meant something. I don't know about your guys' thoughts on that real quick, but.
Oh, I completely agree. Bryce Harper, everything you've seen from him doing in Philly with the comments he's making, daily when it was, from when he got here till now, the guy doesn't say things just to say things. The guy's saying what he means. And, like I said, just how he's embraced the city. I've said it on pods before. Everything that the guy says, he's really just embracing the city. And there's no other way to say it. There just really is, like, he's making the statement to make the statement. He wants him. You don't want to piss him off. Get it done.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And we'll transition into Klentak's next statement here. And that's on the DH. And, Borg, this is something you brought up, but I'll read the quote real quick. And it's the DH is going to have an interesting effect on the entire National League teams, but us too. Just because last offseason, no team was preparing to have the DH, Klentak said. And I know a few of you have written or speculated on this, but my guess is we will not name a full-time DH, a starting DH the way some American League teams do. I think more likely we'll use it as an opportunity to spread out at bats, give guys days off that deserve it, and that way they don't have to play the field. And I'll end the quote there because it's kind of just repeating himself a little bit over time. But let me ask you this, and I know we talked about it before. Which direction would you want the Phillies to go? Kind of keep it open like that, or to start the season for the first week or two? Would you rather than pinpoint a DH, whether it's Jay Bruce, whether it's Alec Boehm? And we'll start with you, Biscuit, since we started with Borg on the last one. Would you rather kind of pinpoint a DH, or would you rather just keep it open and let the hottest bat get to that spot?
I think how Girardi and Klentak seemed to echo it both the other day and today. I think this is the way to go. And I've said this on the pod a couple of times when we've talked about a universal DH. I like the fact that they're going to keep it open and just kind of, let who's ever hot in there, or, let someone who's in the field usually get a day off but still in the lineup for at-bats. But at the same time, someone, is going to see the most time there. Like, I do think it'll be, pretty sporadic day to day at first for the first couple weeks, but I do think over time, someone's going to get hot and someone's going to stay hot, and that's the person that I do think will get the most at bats at that position. But I don't think you need a set DH right now. I think you should let that marinate throughout the beginning of the season.
Bork?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think to start the season you have to let it go all around, but I think if someone gets hot like a Bruce, especially Bohm, if Bohm gets hot and is hitting both sides of the plate, and all of our infielders like Segura, Gregorius, and Kingery are all playing well as well, you're not going to boot them from their fielding position if they're also fielding well to put him in the field. So if he starts hitting, to develop him, you're definitely probably going to see him in there more, because that's going to really help his development rate, and he's earned that time if he really starts hitting. The same goes for Bruce, because I know when Girardi talked about it, he said Jay Bruce has done it in the past and he's probably going to play a role in this. So if he really gets going, and he hit lefties before he got injured last year for us, he was hitting both sides of the plate while he was in. He's a guy that I could see them going to, but at the beginning it's good to give it more open, because then you get to see who really takes it in stride and gets going in the first couple weeks to 3 weeks. And then you kind of can pick somebody from there, or pick just 2 people instead of always switching between like 4 or 5 people and change. Because once you get a mainstay in, I think that just helps your lineup having 1 or 2 mainstays at DH instead of always moving it around, where then all you're going to move it around for is giving Kutch days off, giving Harper a day off, and giving Real Muto a day off in the field at a certain point, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a different approach. I get it. You want to give guys days off here and there, and that'll come down the road. And they already said McCutcheon's 100% healthy now, with obviously the season starting late, so he should be good to go. Obviously, eventually you give your catcher a day off here and there, but I mean, obviously JT will be good to go to start the year. And trust me, I like Jay Bruce, and I think he can step in there and be a great DH. But to me, the amount we talk about him and the amount of hype he has, and he's obviously going to, especially with 30 guys now, he has a great chance to make the roster. If Alec Bohm makes the roster, I say you give him the DH spot. You kind of get Bruce on board with it too. He already seems like a great veteran that's willing to help out the team in whatever way is possible. And you kind of say, all right, Alec, Bohm, you get the first week of the season, and you kind of you put him out there and see if he can get off to that hot stretch, see what he has right then and there. And obviously, if you start struggling, then you give him a day off or so, and you put Bruce in there because you have a good backup like that to take a role in that spot. But I think with how committed they seem to Bohm and how good and hyped up he is from scouts left and right, and him being up there in top prospects, and now you have the DH here, so you kind of get the extra ability to give him the spot with your infield being crowded and Hoskins at first. I honestly, and like I said, I like Bruce, but me personally, I would rather see him give it to Bohm to start the year, let him see what he can do when he first comes up, and then obviously mix Bruce in here and there, which way.
I agree to an extent, but I also disagree. Like I said, I think it's Jay Bruce's job. Like, I think I'll put it to you this way: come opening day, I think Jay Bruce will be in the designated hitter role, and I don't think Alec Bohm will start directly with the 30-man roster just because of the service time. And I believe it's only if you keep your players down for, I think it's like 7 games now, given the shortened season, then they get that extra year of service time. So I don't believe you'll see Alec Bohm right away. However, once he's up, you can't bring a guy up who you expect to be a stud and not play him. So I agree. I think that at the end of the season, when everything is said and done, Alec Bohm will have the most appearances in the DH role this season. I think he'll see a little bit of field action, and I don't think that'll come at third base. I think it's going to come at first base. I think that's going to work when you give Hoskins that day off of the field, but he's in the DH role, and Alec Bohm sticks at first base. I think it'll, when you have Hoskins at first base, but you want to give Kutch a day off in left field, you could put Jay Bruce out there and have Bohm back in that DH spot. So I agree, once he's up, he's going to see a lot of playing time, but I still don't think you need to necessarily designate him that position.
Yeah, I agree with the both of you because that's kind of why I said if Bohm gets going, you have to keep him as your DH because it helps with his development. If you're a manager that sees a young kid hitting well and all of a sudden because you have a good veteran option, you put him in, that's just when your fans think you're an absolute idiot because it makes no sense. So the if the kid comes up and does well, he has to get the time. I do think it would be wise for his development to also give him a few games and probably more than just 2 or 3 if you could, if he's really hitting that well fielding at third, because in all likelihood, if all continues to go well, you're probably going to want him to be your third baseman. So I think that would help his development as well, rather than just playing first and DHing. But we'll see what happens there. But I think he's a guy you have to go to if he really gets going. And then Bruce is definitely your fallback guy. And then another guy could be if he can start hitting again. Obviously, he has power against right-handers, and he's a switch hitter, and he's probably going to make the 30-man roster from Pennsylvania. Neil Walker, if he could hit for you, could be a pinch hitter type guy that might be able to DH some, like 10 games maybe for you, especially if he hits anything like he's freaking hitting when I called him up in MLB due to injuries. So, we'll be completely tight. We'll be completely fine then.
All right, so not only is Bork taking over the front office, you also got to control our players then. So make sure we do well. What's your record in your season? Can we trust your record?
Yeah, I'm in first battling with the Nationals at the end of the last 20 some games of the season. We're both have the same record basically. So we're almost even. I'm 1.5 ahead of them now because I just beat them in the first game of the series.
All right, good. Well, make sure you continue that. But so let's move into the next big thing, kind of going along with the DH. And we mentioned, obviously, we have a lot of different options there. And Joe, you bring up, or Bork, since you're both Joes, Bork, you bring up Neil Walker. And obviously, you're going to have a lot of guys fighting for that kind of last roster spot that can fill in to that DH role. I mean, we saw what we got in this offseason. And, I mean, just two guys real quick. And Neil Walker and Josh Harrison are two veterans that who knows which way you're going to go with them, and even Logan Forsythe. So you got a lot of different guys and options there. And this past week, they released a 60-man roster. Philly's only used up 53 spots for now because of, I guess they're still deciding and different types of caution here and there. And we kind of saw some guys left off it, which surprised me considering you didn't use all 60. So I wanted to know, for me personally, I would say Odubel Herrera and Mickey Moniak. Those were two guys that kind of surprised me because, first off, Herrera's been up here before, so I thought he'd at least get on the 60-man roster. And then Moniak, you take him first overall. I would figure you'd still want to kind of develop him and give him some of those big league camp kind of things instead of letting him sit. Or I don't know, he's obviously not going to sit around. He's probably working out and stuff, but give him that big league option rather than the minor leagues are canceled and not having him kind of do anything in that sense. Bork, I'll start with you. First off, with those two guys and anyone else, were you surprised by what the Phillies did with that 50-man roster that they released?
I actually wasn't surprised Odubel wasn't on it because I think the organization has pretty much just given up on him and they're trying to trade him. I remember seeing an article a couple of days ago that was just they can't find any trade interest in him, which the way that article was phrased basically makes me think they have no interest in playing him. It's just they can't find any trade interest in him. So I think that wasn't the biggest surprise to me. A bigger surprise was definitely Moniak, who obviously, like you said, we only have 53 of the 60 so far, so maybe they're just delaying adding people for whatever reason. Of course, some of that could have to do with certain people that test positive while down in Florida. I'm not sure if he was in Clearwater or not, but I'm not sure if any of it has to do with any of that potentially, some of the cases from down there on delaying certain people's announcements onto the 60-man pool. So that's kind of the way I was potentially looking at it, but I was surprised the most by Moniak because, like you said, he was a first overall pick. It would make sense to have him in camp training with obviously your other best of the best minor leaguers plus your major leaguers, and then they're also going to be training, they said, using Lehigh once everything goes back, and they just have the taxi bus squad training away from the major league squad. So that would be very much benefiting him. So I was shocked that he wasn't on it. But I do think this taxi squad, potentially with some young pitchers that we could get into in a bit, could help the Phillies with guys like you have Howard up, Seabold's been talked about before. I still think Vince should play in the pen, but that's a different story. And then so like you have like these guys that might be able to help us because some of those guys really have impressed at times in the minors, especially when I watch those games that we do get on TV. I remember seeing Seabold pitch a couple times, and that kid has some pretty good stuff to potentially be a long man for you that can eat some innings at times.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and be interesting to see what they do with the young arms. But before we get into more of that, Biscuit, what was your thoughts when you kind of saw this roster? Was anyone surprise you that did not make it?
Not really. No big surprises. Moniak wasn't a surprise. I didn't expect to see his name there. Um, you know, I feel like Moniak was drafted at such a young age. We're getting to the point where it's like, wow, he still hasn't, broke camp or still hasn't made it to the majors, but he's still only 22 years old. So I do think he has a little time yet to still prove himself down in the minors before he really gets his, chance to come up for, a spring training invite. In terms of Herrera, I was surprised at first, but not surprised just because I feel like, and correct me if you guys feel differently, I feel like with Herrera, ever since his suspension and everything that he did, whenever, like looking back when the 40-man roster was released before, pre-COVID and everything, and there was still speculation of, will he be on there? He most likely will be on there, but he was kept off. And even before the 60-man roster was released, it was like, don't be surprised if you see his name on there. He most likely might be on there. There's a good chance that he'll be on there. And then boom, he is not on there. But even after, Klentak is still saying, we're still keeping our options open. But I don't, I agree with Boric. I don't think they really are. I think they're done with him. I think they understand that the fans really don't want to see him on the field at all this season. I think it would take a situation where we'd be in fucking trouble with a lot of injuries or, God forbid, COVID situations where we really see him get any action this season at all. And I think that's kind of, the way they want it. I don't think they want him up in the big leagues. I think they want to just kind of ride out the last year with him. If I'm not mistaken, he's done at the end of this year. He'll hit free agency. I really don't expect us to find any type of trade partner just because of how much time he's missed, the fact that he hasn't been good for quite some time, given, his domestic violence scandal. I don't see why anyone would want him. So I think they're just going to keep him down there till, they ride it out. He's done. Then he's someone else's problem at that point. But other than that, looking at the remaining, 50 different players, no one was really a surprise. I didn't expect to see, some of the more top prospects down in the farm, like Bryson Stott. I didn't expect Mickey Moniak. So it kind of just looks how exactly I would have expected it at this point.
See, I agree with everything you said, Biscuit, other than I have a question of why you didn't expect Moniak, because he was picked, I believe it was in the 2016 draft. Yeah, he was picked out of high school, but for me, when you're picked that long ago, when you don't have a minor league season, I just feel it's better to train with your squad instead of being where, I don't know where he lives, so wherever he lives, training on fields around there and doing all that stuff, because that's just not the same. You would get the same, major league equivalent workouts when you first reported, and then when you guys dispersed, you would get the minor league equivalent workouts. So it's something that's kind of the way I was looking at it. I think if you picked him that long ago, he is younger, but he's in his 20s now, obviously. So I feel it would just behoove them to have him on the 60-man pool just for development's sake, not to probably ever use.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, and I understand your point, but at the same time, I think, given everything going on and given how this season is going to play out, like you really have to take into consideration that like you might see a lot of these guys. You don't know what injuries are going to look like. God forbid if people get COVID, like obviously the expanded rosters are in place for a reason, and that's because you're going to see guys who have probably never seen a lot of big league action see some big league action this year just because of everything going on. And I don't think that he's at the end of the day, I just don't think Moniak's ready for big league action yet. I think he's still someone who needs to prove himself in the minors. He's had hot stretches before, but he's really never put it together in a full season. And God forbid if they get to him and they need to use him, like at what he's just kind of not ready for that situation. And I think at the end of the day, that's why probably he was kept off of the roster.
Gotcha. That makes some sense. It's just obviously guys like Mickey Matuk and some of the other guys we have on our roster are kind of just journeymen. So I would assume statistics wise, he could at least, if he was forced to play, because he would be at the bottom of the roster, be equivalent to them. But I don't think my thing was I know developing him would probably be the best if he was here with the guys rather than away from the squad for a whole year, getting picked that long ago, when you hope at least in the next 2 years, probably at the latest, he's finally able to come up with you.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and I mean, with this roster, we obviously got a lot of different spots kind of still open and everything. And I guess to kind of close it out here in the last topic, I'm just going to ask you guys a few questions about the roster and which way you think they can go. And we'll start with probably one of the biggest debates right now. And obviously, we've talked about Alec Boehm and how much we trust him. And obviously, the other big prospect that made this is Spencer Howard. Do you guys think he's got a legitimate shot to win that fifth spot? Or do you think he's got a lot to kind of climb over without any of these games being played and kind of just doing workouts? Obviously, for that fifth spot, we expect Nola, Wheeler, Jake Arrieta, and Zach Eflin to kind of get the top four. And then you kind of got guys like Nick Pivetta, Vince Velasquez, and Spencer Howard. Which one do you think wins the spot, or who would you like to see in that spot? And do you think Howard has a legitimate shot to kind of be that fifth spot to start opening week or whatever? And let's start with Biscuit.
So out of the gate, no, I don't think Spencer Howard will be the fifth starter, just because, like I brought up earlier with Alec Boehm, service time. So I will expect, Spencer Howard to start, not on the 30-man roster and joining after that 7-day period. So he gets the other additional year of service time. I think it's going to be Nick Pivetta, just because I still think they are somewhat high on his ability. They still do see some potential in him. And I guess the potential is there, but the guy really hasn't been able to put it together. Personally, at this point, with Rangers Suarez now up in the air, given the news today that he's on the IL with, very, very undiscussed reasoning behind that. It's alleged that he might be one of the players who contracted the coronavirus. COVID and Corona, they kind of meshed in my brain right there. But
same thing.
I think it'll be Nick Pivetta. I still think it's his job to lose. Spencer Howard, when he does get up, I think they'll start him off, very slow. Maybe a few relief appearances here and there, and then in that final stretch, maybe like your last 30 games, 20 games of the season, you see him take that fifth spot, and he gets the final remaining starts for the fifth spot. But I think it'll be Nick Pivetta at first.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point in Ranger Suarez. It's unfortunate he's got to be on that 10-day IL or whatever. And he's a guy I was actually really interested in spring training. He's a guy I liked and thought they should give him a shot for that fifth spot with how well he was pitching. And so I think it's a shame, especially because even if he didn't get that spot, he was still a really good reliever out of the pen. But one thing you keep mentioning, and that's the 7-game service for these young minor league guys. Is that something? I know you expect them to do it for the team's sake, but would you rather the team just bring them on and start them with the team right away, kind of go out of the gate, try to get off to a quick start? Or is that something you would rather sacrifice potentially I mean, obviously, who knows if they would start, but sacrifice some of those games and kind of have them start in the minors to get that extra year out of them.
Oh, I would have them up on, if it were me, I would have them up on the big leagues on opening day. Look, it's not 162 games anymore. It's 60. It's a sprint. It's not a marathon anymore. You need to be winning games from the get-go or you're shit out of luck. If you hit, halfway through this 60 game season, you're at game 30 and the Phillies, God forbid, are like, having a losing record, like at that point you're kind of fucked. So I think you need, if Alec Boehm and Spencer Howard are what everyone, and I mean everyone, thinks they can be, which is, a perennial all-star, whether it's at first base or third base, the bat is there, and they believe the bat alone can make them, an all-star. And with Spencer Howard, number 2 at the least, maybe a number 1 in the rotation, yeah, you need that. You need that. And like, let's be real, like, I think the lineup can be really good. I think the lineup is going to be good, but there are still questions about that rotation. I mean, for after Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, like, it's a toss-up. Like, Jake Arrieta, like, every year we go through the best, he's in good shape again, he's healthy, he's not, coming off an injury, he's going to be good to go, but then he gets injured again, and then it's the narrative repeats itself. You don't know what you're going to get from him. Zach Eflin has shown flashes of him being dominant, but it's not enough. And let's be real, like, you don't know what you're going to get from Nick Pivetta and Vince Velasquez, and it's probably not going to be anything special if it's any indicator of the last, handful of seasons. So yeah, if it were me, and Spencer Howard would have a spot in the rotation, and Alec Boehm would probably be starting either at third base or in the DH spot on opening day if it were up to me.
I agree with Biscuit. I think you have to. I mean, I think that's just what all managers do and have to do to kind of please the business end of the organization, usually to have the extra year in most cases. So now that it's only 7 games, they're probably definitely going to do it, even though it's a marathon, or it's a sprint, not a marathon. But I also agree with Biscuit that Pavetta is 100% probably going to get the fifth spot because, like I said, I think Velasquez profiles more as a guy. If you can just put him in for 1 or 2 innings, he usually comes out firing and then just forgets how to control the ball after like an inning and a half or 2 innings. So if he's in the bullpen with his stuff, that would be really good. Where Pivetta has that issue, but his stuff just profiles more as a starter. That I think if you can fine tune that now that you finally have a great coaching combination between Girardi, who was a catcher himself, and then you have Brian Price, who obviously has ample experience and is one of the best and more touted pitching coaches in baseball. So I think this is the final year, and hurrah for Nick Pivetta, because I think what Spencer Howard ends up getting to do is going to be up to Nick Pivetta and then up to the other guy that Biscuit brought up, Jake, who normally does solid in the first 60, because I know I saw a tweet a couple weeks ago in 2018 before he didn't tell us about that knee injury and kept pitching and sucked for like 3 weeks before he said he had a knee injury. I don't know if y'all remember that. He was actually pitching to a high 2s ERA through about 60. Then last year it was like a high 3, so it was like a good 4 or 5 pitcher. Then he sucked because of the bone. So if he can do even that high 3s, that will be adequate enough for this year, because he's going to be your potential 4th or 5th. Because Eflin, with the way that he has stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if he impresses Girardi. It's a new staff in camp, and they give him the 3rd spot because he's also younger and still coming into his own a bit, where Arrieta is obviously aging out and not the same thing he used to be. So it's going to be interesting, but I think Jake and Nick play a big part in where Spencer Howard's going to be by season's end.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and especially with, I mean, you see the way his health has been kind of a problem the last couple of years too. So outside of how much he struggled here and there, I mean, you got to be worried about that sense, especially with the way the pitchers got to get ready for the season, and hopefully they can go out more innings than they're expected to. But a lot of guys are already saying they might not be able to go 7 or 8 innings this year just because of the situation. So for guys like that, you got to be ready to have a lot of different pitchers on your team, and it's gonna be a weird year. And you start the year at 30, and then after 2 weeks, your roster drops to 28, and then after another 2 weeks, I think it drops to the 26. So it's kind of a weird way. You gotta adjust it So obviously, when it's still at 30, you probably expect to keep a few extra arms, and it'll be interesting to see how the team handles it when you have those like mid-season cuts, which I think is weird. If I was the league, just keep it at 30 for the year with all the weird things that are going on, and you're like I said, you're gonna have to protect some of these pitchers with the way their arms are gonna be. I would have just left it at 30 for the season.
I would have kept it at least 28. I don't know why they did the double. Like once I read it first, it went down to 28. I'm like, okay, that's okay, I guess. And then it went down to the normal new roster structure. I was like, that doesn't make any sense for this year. So I agree with you. I would have at least only had it go down one notch because it doesn't make sense to not be able to carry extra arms because the likelihood was if you had still two extra people with this year, the teams are probably going to carry two extra pitchers. So
Right.
that would really help with potential injuries. And we also have to point out they were talking about it on MLB Network, the virus and all this, and on the return to play special, this plays a big role too because the Phillies, your biggest opponent is not even necessarily who you're facing this year. It's actually the virus because if someone gets sick in your rotation too, then that automatically obviously is probably going to have Spencer Howard be the first guy, God forbid, but to come into your rotation if someone does unfortunately come down with the virus. So that's a huge factor outside of the abilities and who produces on the field.
Well, another thing that's scary about that is, I mean, if you think about it, when you look at kind of the rosters and the teams, when you see the dugout in between games, who's sitting with who? Usually the pitchers are all kind of like sitting together. So if like one player in that rotation does get the virus, there's a good chance there's another one of those five that are
Mhm.
going to have it, or any other there's pitchers on the roster. So when if
I thought they had to sit in the stands. I thought they said they had to spit because Gosselin was talking about that on NBC Sports the other morning that if I made the roster and I wasn't starting, it's going to be interesting because I feel we would have to sit in the stands. So wouldn't they be more spaced out?
well, yeah, players have to, they have to sit in the stands for games and stuff, but I'm sure for workouts they're kind of still working together
Oh,
and
well,
stuff.
okay, I got
So
it.
I was just talking about, I did mention the games, you're right, but I was also just talking about in general as a whole, because like, which I guess they're probably spaced out in that sense too, but I would still think if one of the five get it, there's a good shot that there's another person in there. And while we're on that topic, and Biscuit, you mentioned it earlier about Ranger Suarez, there were three other guys that potentially we don't know if it's a real injury or if it's a sickness or whatnot. They weren't allowed to go further in detail. All we know is these four guys, and Ranger Suarez, Hector Neris, Tommy Hunter, and Scott Kingery are all already on the 10-day IL list, and we don't know when they're going to return. And I was thinking they'd be ready by the end of July, but Bork, you mentioned beforehand that they're saying they might not be ready because I guess another thing you got to remember is if they're missing quote unquote spring training 2.0, these guys are going to have to kind of retrain still when they get back. So I guess these guys are questionable for opening day. So my next question is you're going to be losing three guys in your bullpen right there in Ranger Suarez, Hector Neris, and Tommy Hunter, and your expected closer. So I'll ask you, Bork, to start. Say they can't go for opening day. Who do you kind of just go with matchups, or do you name someone else kind of the closer, and who would you trust outside of Neris to kind of man that closer role?
Yeah, I mean, this would be a lot easier if obviously, like they said, he might be able to come back in the second half. Robertson was somehow able to come back to start the season. But since that's not the case, this is the biggest effect because Hunter would probably be your guy. Like, if you really think about it, if he wasn't in there, he's closed at times in the past. Before he went back on the IL last year, he came back and pitched really well for a couple games, which is probably a main reason why they figured low risk, high reward. We might as well bring him back. So that was a big loss for me. And then Ranger Suarez might have been your third guy. So you literally lost like the peg of people I would probably have went down to be like, because now I would go, okay, well, there's Adam Morgan, and like they're like the only people that really have had and like then there's Bud Norris. So like if you want the left side, it's really like you have Alvarez, but I haven't liked what I've seen from him in the past in closing situations compared to other situations. So like it's like kind of Bud Norris, you have to hope, who has closing experience in the past, is able to kind of put it together for you potentially. Then you have Morgan from the left side, because I don't think right from the jump you're going to be like, oh, I'll give Velasquez a chance to close. We have full-blown confidence in Vince Velasquez having a chance to close, because I would be absolutely shocked. if the Phillies from the jump said we have full-blown confidence in Velasquez having a chance to close, because we don't have – I'm looking at our team. We don't have anybody else that has experience other than Robert Stock, but Robert Stock has been injured and hasn't pitched in the league for a while. You're not going to give it to someone that hasn't pitched as much. So I think it's those two, unless if you trust Vince Velasquez with his stuff to try to get you those outs, or if Vince wins the fifth spot, you trust Nick with his stuff to try to get you those outs because they have the stuff. They just don't have the command and the consistency for me to have confidence in them out of the jump.
Yeah, and you mentioned guys like Jose Alvarez, and I think that's the guy you'd have to kind of lean on, honestly, if say this was the case.
I don't like that because
I mean, it's at the point where we don't like it, and it just further note that how about next offseason, Matt Klentak, you don't forget that pitching is important in baseball, especially the relievers. Another offseason where you kind of forgot about that spot. So how about next offseason you kind of fix some of these issues? But my point here is you mentioned Bud Norris. I don't like that. He's kind of been in and out of the league. You mentioned Robert Stock getting hurt. Again, I don't like that option.
I don't like the option either. Reggie McClam would be another option who has a firearm, but he's never been in a big situation in the MLB, the guy we got from Seattle. So, like, there's no, like you said, there's no damn options because Matt Klentak gets every other need every year and goes, pitching's not that important. But.
And that's why I think, in my eyes, honestly, and Biscuit, I'll let you jump here in a second, I'd go with, I know it would be crazy to say it, but I think you got to go either Jose Alvarez or give it to Vince Velasquez. I think in the beginning of the year, maybe you give him the shot because of one, he can get up there in velocity, which you kind of see out of closers, and then he has that sliderish breaking ball that you also kind of see out of closers, and you kind of hope that he can mix those two pitches in really well when you just got to focus on those two rather than just that extra pitch when he's a starter. And I'm not saying they're the same pitcher, but you kind of did that with Brett Myers in 2007 when you kind of just threw him out in the bullpen for 2007. And was he the best closer to have? No, but he wasn't bad. I mean, he got the job done. Obviously, we win the division and stuff. So if you're just asking maybe Vince Velasquez to do it for the first week or two of the season before you get Neris back, I'd honestly think I'd be okay with giving it to Vince or Jose Alvarez. But Biscuit, what are your thoughts on that?
Basically, just echoing what you guys said, I think you're going to see who's ever, depending on how long Neris and Ranger Suarez are out for, I think it's going to be whoever doesn't get that, fifth spot in the rotation. So whether that is Nick Pivetta or Vince Velasquez. Another name to possibly consider is Victor Arano. That's someone that most people have been high on in the past. I believe we didn't have him a lot of last year due to injury. This year he's back, and I believe he's healthy and ready to go. You could also, like I said, depending on how long Hector Neris is out for, you could see a situation where, after the first week and they do bring up Spencer Howard, I could see Spencer Howard being a bullpen innings eater. And I think that's, for him to start in this type of season where you're not going to have pitchers going out, 6, 7, 8, 9 innings. You might only see them pitch 5 or 6 innings at most. I think that's something where, you could still give Spencer Howard a couple innings here and there. And like I said, towards the end of the season, then you could start seeing him getting starts in the rotation. But with Neris, it's scary. It's scary just because of how poor the bullpen performed last year. I do think, this year, if there weren't, the coronavirus and us dealing with this situation, I do think it would have been a more structured and more well-rounded bullpen. But you're right. They still need one piece there. I love Hector Neris, and I think he's a hell of a reliever. But I don't think he is your traditional closer. I like him more in a setup role. I do think they need one more solidified bullpen arm, and that'll, amp this team up to another level.
Yeah, well, if Vince becomes a good closer, though, like Andrew said, and I know, Andrew, I told you this before off the podcast, I always thought he would be better in the pen and potentially as a closer down the line. I just don't know if they would have confidence doing that right away. If he can become a good closer and he does well for, say, Hector's out a week and a half to 2 weeks, I don't think, because of what Biscuit said, there's a good potential they would just slide Hector into the setup spot because he profiles better as that anyway, because he has that great splitter. He has a fastball he mixes in, and sometimes he mixes in a breaking ball, but mostly just sometimes he just goes out there and throws the split by people. So he's a guy that profiles more as a setup guy. I don't know what you think about that because you're the one that's talked about Velasquez starting as a closer right away. It would make sense to me to just stick with him if he starts out hot out of the gate.
Yeah, I guess if he's like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if he's lights out, maybe. But I just feel like it would all depend on when Hector comes back. If it's only like a week into the season, yeah, he's doing well. I'd still give it back to Hector just because I have a lot more faith in him than Vince. I just think because of where you're at, you got to kind of throw it at Vince. Not because of how much I trust him. I just think he's the guy I trust the most out of some of these other arms.
I'm just saying with the stuff. He has stuff more than Hector as a coach.
I mean, unless if he's like lights out, maybe. But I'd say even with the stuff, whether it's better or not, I'd say I trust Hector in most situations more, just because. I mean, when Hector's on, he's pretty good, and like that splitter is better than anything Vince is going to throw. So
I trust Hector more. That wasn't my point. Was more though if you saw who profiled to a closer more, like Biscuit's point. I think if Vince Velasquez became a reliever and he really honed in his pitches to be a reliever, he would profile more as a closer, where Hector would profile more as a setup. So if he was doing great, like I said, more for a 2-week stretch, not just a week stretch, I think it wouldn't be bad to necessarily let him keep going out there because your fallback plan would just be going to Hector if he starts struggling as a closer and then Vince just becomes a regular reliever.
Yeah, maybe in a regular season, but I don't think in a 60-game season, I don't think you have the same opportunity you have to say, like, try that and say, oh, if he starts blowing games,
you could just do it after
then you switch back to him. Like, I think you're in a spot that you can't go in with that mindset, because if you blow 3 or 4 games before you switch back to Hector, you might be blowing your season with.
Yeah, I wouldn't let it go that far. I would only let it, like, if he looked really bad in one game, I would probably go back to Hector when Hector's back. I would just say if he did really good to start, I would let him keep going out there to start. If he looked really bad in one game, I would probably then put.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with one.
Even and then 2 games would be max in a 60-game season, because I don't really. Yeah, you have to care about how the player feels, but you just got to be able to explain it to him because it's a sprint. So you just got to be able to explain that to him, that he can't. We gave you the shot and you had one off game. Maybe in the future you can still be in this role when you have more time to hone it in.
Yeah. And then my final question here, I didn't realize we just hit over the hour mark. My final question here would be, I think depending on who you ask, it's up for grabs, but what do you guys think about center field? And I'll start with you, Biscuit, on this one. Are you a Roman Quinn fan? Do you think he has a shot, or are you Adam Hazley for that starting spot all the way?
I teeter between the two. I like Roman Quinn because I do think he's really dynamic, but I think in terms of like a true center fielder who really does have, such swift defensive skills, I like Hazley for that reason. I think come opening day, overall, I think throughout the majority of the season, the guy you might see the most out there, especially if you're shuffling Bohm throughout the infield, you might see Scott Kingery a lot out there. Obviously, with him now being on the very, very unspecified reasoning IL, you might see more Hazley depending on how Scott Kingery's recovers from this. But I'm going to go with Hazley. I think it'll be him on opening day. The guy might not be a star, but I do think he has the ability to, at least hit at a 270, 280 clip, maybe at his best. I do think there's potential there. I love Roman Quinn, but the injuries are still just concerning, and I'd rather just see Hazley get it out of opening day.
I agree with Biscuit because I love Quinn. I think he's a dynamic player, but I think he's a perfect platoon player at this point because of his injuries. And it actually wouldn't be a bad idea, since he started in the infield, to give him some reps to maybe kind of become a Brock Holt-esque player for your team, because he obviously has way more speed than Holt once did. So he could be a lot more dynamic if he can put the bat on the ball and get on base for you in that type of role. But I see Hazley because of how much he profiles as a center fielder. He also has that sweet lefty swing. The only reason we couldn't tell is because they ruined it when he got called back up. He got sent down. He was hitting around 300. Then he got called back up, and all hell broke loose. So, launch angle. That's all I have to say. But so now that we have Joe Dillon and Joe Girardi, who actually don't treat everyone like they're the same exact hitter, we will probably see Adam Hazley, like Biscuit said, hit around the 265 to 275, even 280 something threshold, because he has that smooth, tries to go to contact lefty swing. And then when I saw him uppercutting shooting the launch angle last year, I was about to like rip my hair out because I was like, this is just the dumbest. He's not a player to do that. It just didn't make sense. So I'm so elated that we'll get to see him and Roman Quinn, because Roman Quinn started having a little bit of a funkier swing last year too. I know he hit one in the second deck when we were there, Andrew, but that's not what Roman Quinn's paid to do. So, like that's that I'm gonna love seeing these guys be able to just do them, and that's what this coaching staff is really going to allow young players, especially, to really just come into the league and be themselves, which is, I think, something that Gabe's staff might not have been the best at doing.
No, I hear what you're saying. I like Roman Quinn, and I think depending on matchups and stuff and the power you already have kind of in this offense, you don't need as much of that power that I think the lack of power Quinn kind of gives is okay in that sense, because I think you can make up for that in other areas is what I'm trying to say. So I just
want him to stay healthy.
Well, yeah, that's obviously the biggest thing in his whole thing that kind of derives his career, but it's a shame to see. But I think there's a lot of good different roster spots kind of open here, and it's going to be fun to see. And I mean, especially with, unfortunately, some of these guys are already going down in Kingery and stuff like that. That might open up a spot for Alec Boehm to make the roster and then start at third base and just move Gene to second and Gregorius at shorts and then Boehm at third. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the way it kind of plays out in these next coming weeks before the season.
And then, like Biscuit said, Kingery would definitely play in center likely in that scenario, with Hazley and Quinn being backups and platooning in and out at that point.
Well, yeah, but I was just talking about if Kingery's got to start the year on the 10-day.
When he comes back, he could just do what Biscuit said in that scenario.
Yeah. But don't forget, it's 4th of July this weekend, so if you're looking for food to kind of cater to you, or kind of just go pick up some sandwiches for whatever 4th of July party you're having, order Just Food. The number is 215-794-FOOD or 215-794-3663. Visit our guy, Asian Rob, and either ask for the chef's choice, or they got a lot of different options, anywhere from a veggie sandwich to roast beef, turkey. They got it all. So just go check out Just Food. Again, get them catered to your liking for this upcoming 4th of July weekend, where obviously once these sports kind of come back and you have your sports parties again or whatever, don't forget about Just Food when you're ordering that kind of sandwich and deli's food in that choice. And I don't know about you guys. Do you have anything else you want to say before we kind of wrap it up here?
Well, if you're going to a sports party when everything comes back, also don't forget to wear a mask. That's another key point to make. But I was just going to say everything's moving. Baseball seems to be coming back. We have guys that look absolutely ready and yoked this year, like Bryce Harper. Kingery before going on this mysterious IL, as Matt Breen and Biscuit described it in our podcast, and Matt Breen in an article. That's something, but he looked great. And then Segura looks the best he's looked in years. And then obviously JT always is just a picture perfect person. So the Phillies look really good, and I think other than the only Achilles heel for this team can be pitching again. Because like we said, Matt Klentak just for some reason doesn't love adding pitching compared to everything else. But if they can figure that out, I think we definitely have a chance in a sprint to be in the postseason.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's all about what the pitching does this year, and the pitching will take us as far as they can go. Because obviously the offense will be there, so it's going to be on the pitching to kind of help us out in that sense. Anything from you, Biscuit?
My final thought for this show is something I echoed earlier when we first began. Phillies, don't let JT Realmuto slip away. Sign him. Don't let him go to the Mets. Don't disappoint me. And that's all.
I thought you were going to say F the Mets.
Oh, fuck the Mets, but you guys should just know that by now.
But yeah, again, stay safe. Have a great weekend, everyone, and enjoy the fourth. And like Borg said, make sure you just play it safe. And again, stay 6 feet apart, wear masks, and enjoy the weekend and just make the most of it as best everyone can. And with that being said, I will send this one off to the Jackdolls, as you can check them out on www.jackdolls.com as they endure our pre and after show music. So again, go check out www.jackdolls.com. Thanks again for listening to another edition of Chasing the Pennant podcast. Happy 4th of July, everyone.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever fight me, I'll throw me caution behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, danced a jig over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son, still have me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.